Can you explain to me why electricity has gone up so much?
One of the reasons that the cost of electricity has gone up so much is not necessarily due to the cost of production, because the actual cost of production of electricity has actually gone down. So if you think last year, 26 gigawatts of generation that went into the NEM, so basically all of the eastern and southern regions of Australia, was 26 gigawatts. Only 23.5 gigawatts came from fossil fuels, from brown and black coal.
You said only.
Only. So
but
renewables,
hang on, 23 out of 26 is quite a bit.
Wait, let me come. So that was the contribution onto the network. But what that figure ignores, or those statistics ignore, is how much was self-consumed. Okay, because people exporting would maybe 40%, maybe even worst case scenario, 50% of what they produce gets exported. So you could actually look at more like 50 gigawatts, maybe even higher, of actual energy was generated. And these are systems below 100 kilowatts. This is all the residential rooftop stuff and a little bit of C&I, but it's the small stuff. That was, getting on for 2, maybe 3 times what was produced by the fossil fuels. So that cost of energy is cheaper, like so cheap. Now that isn't the question. And this is one of the things that often sidetracks or diverts the conversation when you listen to politicians and the like. They talk about the generation. It's actually the way in which the industry works, the way in which we've got a energy industry which was designed well over 100 years ago, which is based on one-way power flow from central generators transmitting energy from point A to point B. And that is still how it's structured. That's how all the costs are structured. So for instance, where I live, I pay $1.40 a day for property to service charge. Ooh. So that is how much I pay for the luxury being connected to the grid. Now, part of that is on the basis of the transmission for me. So I live in northern New South Wales, and where I live, the energy that is delivered to me is on the assumption that it's basically coming from the hunter, right? And so is my neighbour. But if you think about it, when I'm exporting all my solar, my neighbour's using it. So actually what's happening is my neighbour is being charged for transportation of energy from the hunter when actually it's probably about 30 metres. Now that's one of the fundamental issues that we've got, is that the way in which distribution and transmission costs are even out isn't actually fair and equitable. And the fact that we still have this model which is based on that is one of the issues. Also, you've got metering costs which get factored into that as well. And the metering costs are still based on the fact that to a certain degree, people are being employed to go and read your meter. But there's a national rollout of smart meters. People don't come and read your meter anymore. It's all done digitally. But consumers are still paying for that service. Do you see what I mean? So there are all these embedded costs that consumers have to pay, which don't make sense. But we tend to focus on the little bit, which is the actual cost of generation, which is not really the challenge. It's actually the challenge is all the other embedded costs.
Okay. What are all the different levels of the sandwich that make up the cost, and how the heck can we get it down?
So if I think of myself, where I live, since the first electricity bill I paid when I came to Australia in 2008, 2009, I was paying something about 19 cents a kilowatt hour. I now pay about 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's less than doubled. It hasn't actually gone up that much, really, in terms of the cost of electricity. However, back then I was paying about 20 cents for the service to property charges, so the network charges. I'm now paying $1.40 a day. That's where the charges are coming from. So when you then look at what goes on the bill, you've got the cost of the actual kilowatt hours that you're consuming, but you've then got all these other costs which get layered onto it. And a lot of them are the distribution costs. So that's the stuff, sort of the way the energy moves around local to you. Then you've got the transmission costs. So that's on the assumption that your energy you're consuming is coming from 100 kilometers away, maybe even more. And then you've got other bits of cost in there as well, metering costs, and you've got other little bits.
And
to
the
offset.
energy retailer, I mean, they got their call centers and
They're added into bits, so you've got sort of percentages within some of those other costs which factor that in. Yeah.
so is there any chance for electricity to come down?
Without a dramatic reform of the way in which the energy industry is structured, I think it's very unlikely that energy costs are going to come down. And this is one of the things that we've seen as at the residential level, residential solar has increased so dramatically over the past decade. It's gone absolutely nuts. Energy companies, so not the retailers, the networks, they used to make money on a portion of the energy that you would be consuming. But instead, because as properties have become more energy efficient, that proportionally has got less. So then to counter that, they then put up the service to property charges, this fixed charge. So they know they've always got this steady fixed income. So unless that gets looked at, I can't see how you can actually do that much to reduce the cost of electricity for consumers.
Wow, and there was the government make a big promise.
Yeah. Well, one of their big promises is investing more in transmission, is building more poles and wires, which from an efficiency perspective and to be able to get more large-scale renewables onto the network, that kind of makes sense. But the way in which all that investment works is that the government invests in it, the networks then spend the money. The value of the network that the networks own, the poles and wires that the network own, the value goes up. But that value is then what they can charge as a percentage to the consumers in their network charges. So all that money basically gets paid for or it gets compensated back to the government through the consumers, and it's sort of through the hands of the networks. So and again, when you then look at the large-scale generation, all that's really addressing is the cost per kilowatt hour. And if you look then at the wholesale value of electricity, it's down at sort of 3, 4, 5 cents per kilowatt hour. There's not much further it can go.
So you're saying we're starting off with electricity at 3 to 4 cents in the generation area. But then you've got the transmission and they take their slice. Then you've got the energy retailer, the one that measures the meter, they take their slice. And then you've got the daily consumption charges and they go on from 20 cents to $1.40 in some regions.
Yeah.
So they take their slice. So you've got really a bit like Elvis. One person plays the guitar, which is the one that generates it, and then 40 people live off it.
Basically, yeah.
So you really have to reform the energy market.
Yeah. And look, there's things also that the networks can do. It always strikes me as really bizarre when you drive around, you see these wooden poles with these wires on them and these trees which need to be chopped and pruned once or twice a year.
And they look ugly
They look ugly, and they just look at them. And every time there's a storm, they blow over, and then you've got to send people out to fix them. Why don't they bury them? If they buried them, there's no maintenance. Or there's like a fraction of the maintenance. I can remember a few years ago.
So you're saying, in some way, we leave the poles and wires up there, so there's a whole industry behind it to maintain it, because if you would get rid of it, then basically the cost could come down, but we politically would possibly have to sack a few people.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh.
Exactly.
But we all pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but the high electricity cost at the moment is a huge burden for small business. You run your fridge and your coffee shop and all that, the rents are gone up. It's really hard to recover that. Manufacturing, forget about the government spending billions of manufacturing if you haven't fixed the energy input cost, including gas. So are we in such a big mess because we privatized it all, or is there any solution?
There is a solution. I mean, you can look at other markets, other countries that have looked at the way in which the energy market operates and applied different rules. If you look at competition in Australia, it's across the board. There is very little competition. You have monopolies, you have duopolies. Even within the energy sector, the electricity sector, you've got 16 networks. You've got about 45 retailers. You've got 18 VPP operators. It's not much. And why is that? It's because there's no really way for them to go or to differentiate or, be able to offer anything different to the others, because you're still burdened with this model, which is prehistoric. If you look at a country like Germany, they got 1,100 retailers. 1,100. That's nuts. Because they got rules there that allow consumers, like you could literally get together with your street and go, right, let's form our own energy retail company. Let's just do it ourselves. We can then share the energy that we produce between each other, and we're only going to pay the network costs of the bit we're using. Right? A massively equitable structure. You can't do that here. There's a thing years ago, I don't know if you remember, there was all this thing like virtual net metering and peer-to-peer trading, where there's this fantastic idea that I could sell you my energy, right? And you're only going to pay the transmission between me and you. Well, that got shot down because how does that, because you're still connected to the rest of the network. So no, I'm going to sell my energy to you. You're my neighbor, but you're still going to have to pay the network charges as if you're getting it from 200 kilometers away. So that's one of the fundamental issues. We need to look at the whole energy industry as a whole and look at a much more balanced way that distribution and transmission is factored and exactly where energy is going from. And as we get into this digital age, you can see that easily. You can track exactly where your energy went to, or you could work it out far more equitably. It's not that hard to do. It just requires political will.